Hi. To start with, I might take a picture of you all so I could help explain my daughter when I'm not at home tonight. Would you raise your hand for me and say hello to my daughter? She understands, be happy. Wow. That's cool. Thank you. Been traveling too much recently, so I've heard fantastic talks this morning. Many are valuing how much technology is fantastic. A little bit on the critical side, on the soft side, with a friend of mine, Pierre, designer. How many of you are scientists actually in the room? Just raise your hand. Okay, all right. So I hope my talk is going to be interesting for you. I'm going to talk a little bit on the soft side of what is the user experience of certain products. You might appreciate. So how many of you actually own an activity tracker? Okay, about a third. How many of you still use it? Oh, not that much. That's a product, an activity tracker sold on eBay just after a few weeks of being used. In fact, in 2013, 1 out of 10 American adults had an activity tracker, and 50% of them actually stopped using it. A third of them actually stopped using it within the first three to 6 months. So my talk is going to be about exploring reasons and opportunities on how is it to design for people about medical or well-being devices. So activity tracking all start with big data, right? A big data of quantified self, behavioral data, a lot of behavioral data we can track. It's big data, okay? And all the rhetorics builds on the long-established scientific ground of objectivity. This idea that an objective truth could be represented. The assumption that we could see reality through one single perspective as being the objective truth. It was the case with architecture and design already during the Renaissance period. So designers start to build perspectives to see things as they claimed they were. This is a mirror from 4th century before Christ. It was considered at the time as representing the truth, although the image was far from being perfect, and actually the image was actually reversed. It was seen as the truth. The question I have is how much objective reality is relevant in the user experience of products from which we get tracked for health and fitness. That's the key question. Because all instruments we see through are designed, and to a certain extent they only show approximations. I'm sure as scientists you're all familiar with that. This is the sociology of techniques. We know that we can only see through the tools and devices we created. In some cases, though, you get a proper warning that this image is not reality. Yeah. These are activity trackers I've been using. None of them could agree on something that sounded quite trivial to me, the number of steps I'm doing every day. And the difference is quite significant, and that's quite annoying actually, that such a simple thing there could be such a huge difference in the results each of them give me. Data, machine learning, artificial intelligence are designed systems. And very often, we don't know the assumptions that have driven the design of these. In this case, this is about Google Image. Google Image as a software has been trained to learn to find artifacts and faces through machine learning techniques. The way it works, many of you know that, they get given samples. The thing is, they forgot to provide black faces as samples. This is quite unfortunate that then the system recognized black faces to the closest approximation, unfortunately gorillas. So when I say assumption, that's a little bit of an understatement here. Same for here. That digital camera, although made in Japan, recognized that Asian face as blinking. Probably because it's been designed with the assumption that if it's for the American market, that's going to be used by white faces primarily. Even apparently trivial information, simple as weather, is an information that is designed. We don't read raw weather information. So how is it in your culture? Are you specifying weather through 16 graduations? 36? Well, that's a bit small here on the screen, but in Finland, they have 53 words to just talk about the snow. So language is something interesting. Every data is abstracted. We use metaphors and concepts to explain things. Designers are very good at using metaphors because they know metaphors are affordances. They help one grasp the unknown by analogy to the known. The most brilliant example so far in the digital space is the desktop metaphor invented at Xerox PARC. This was designed for Sally, an executive assistant that should be able to use a computer with no prior computer knowledge. So there's been an abstraction, a language created with metaphors as the illusion of a desktop to help her learn and use that machine. We are not rational people. In fact, the way we engage with the world and have an experience of the world is primarily through our senses. We hear, see, smell, and only then we reflect, we categorize things, depending on value or ethics, certain elements of context, and then we act. But perception is something quite complex. Because as person, when we sense, we don't subdivide things. We see the whole as bigger than the sum of the parts. You're probably all familiar with these pictures. Probably the old lady in particular, or unless you've seen the young one. So that image is just one single image, but some of you might see something through it, some others might see something else. And we don't decompose this image as elements, we see it as a whole. That's Gestalt. Perceiving is complex even more because our senses influence each other. So the audio influences the sight. This is called synesthesia. Actually, it goes even further than that. Actually, there's a frequency equivalence between colors and sounds. Perception and experience is complex because we project subjectivities. So on the promise of objectivity, this is a map. On this map, these are subjective representations. These are territories of the locals in blue that take pictures in New York and the tourists that take pictures in New York. They are creating territories. This is a subjective experience they have and they could eventually socialize and communicate about. This is on top of the objective side, the intersubjectivity layer that eventually can help share an experience. Intersubjectivity is obviously very true when it comes to data. Only recently I could access my own data, but for a long time I was just primarily the one without access to my very own data. Sorry, what happened? The thing is that here, whether I'm the physician, I'm a family member, I'm the neighbor, I'm the husband, I'm the doctor, whoever, we all share different perspectives. We have different needs, we have different language to talk about the very same data. So when we access the intersubjectivity layer to help the socialization and the conversation around the data, then there's an abstraction, a language to be created to make this happen. Context is also very relevant. There's been long studies starting from Merleau-Ponty, who talked about phenomenology. More recently at Xerox PARC, Max Weiser considered that the vision of ambient computing would happen through modeling context. But we're very often misleading when we talk about context, because we see context as being here and now. In most experiences where context is well integrated, it's actually more about showing what just happened before, the near past, and what might happen in the near future. I'm here on stage. If my phone would tell me that I have friends in the room, that has absolutely no value. But if it was able to say, tomorrow you will see friends in the room, that could make sense. Or yesterday you might have seen friends in the room. That's also very interesting. So the notion of context is more than just real-time data about the here and now. It's much more subtle about the dynamics of what I was doing to what I'm about to do. So that's Minkowski's model that he uses to explain quantum physics. I'm using it as an analogy. So what we can track is still very, very partial. We cannot track motivation and desires of people. And when it comes to behaviors, we can only very partially track information and barely having a sense of context. So there is a very long way to go before we actually have any form of smart agent, smart at least in a human sense. Still, activity trackers are primarily selling on the promise of objectivity. But as I said, there is no such a thing as objectivity to create behavioral change or engagement. We know by fact that people can't just rely on facts to understand things and change behaviors. Some then go a bit further and use the social layer and help people have discussions about what they're doing. That helps to push the engagement a little bit further, but still, after a while, sometime a year, people stop using these devices. There's another layer that is now underused, this idea of engagement through subjectivity of a third party. Imagine that this device would come with a smart agent with a fair understanding of the context. Imagine that there's something that didn't happen there. Okay. Imagine that any single experience, he would tell me a story. He would have an attitude. He would say certain things at a certain time in a certain way, considering it as a way to engage me. What would be the agent you would like to get engaged in behavioral change? Would that be an empathic one with a good sense of context, understanding what's going on and providing inspirational comments? Would that be a pushy coach with ignoring totally the sense of context and just pushing for facts and being aggressive and getting you to get things done? Or would that be a muse to get inspired from, to build rituals with? Quant is the company I'm joining on the 4th of April. This is a company that believes that objectivity is not just the only way to provide things and help people searching or understand information. We take all these questions very seriously, actually. Some people compare Quant as a competitor to Google. I don't think it's an interesting comparison, because Quant understands and wants to value the idea that perspectives matter and subjectivity on things makes sense. So all these elements are fragile ideas we're pushing for, but you have to understand that so far what we're delivering through objectivity, intersubjectivity, is not yet enough to create engagement, and there's more to do than just having data analyzed to push for users. So that's it for my talk. Thank you very much.